Thank you very much, Michael, and thank you to you and Dino for all the work you've done in organising the conference. It's been brilliant so far, so thank you very much. Hopefully this talk will be useful as well. So what I want to talk to you today is about redesigning a third year course, so looking to integrate evaluative judgment into the way that we teach our third year course. Let me just see if I can... Okay, sorry about that, my pointer's not working. Okay, so why was change needed? So what I'm going to do for the talk, is first of all talk about why we needed to make change, what the details of the module redesign were, and then evaluation of interventions, and then some results and reflection at the end. So just to give you a bit of overview of the structure of our course. So in the first and second year, probably like many of the practical courses, we're looking to develop students' practical skills and techniques. And then as they move into third year, we change tact into trying to then introduce research skills. So scaffolded research, working in teams and trying to integrate skills development into that. And the idea of this is that that then sets them up if they're doing an MSci fourth year for their independent research in fourth year. But we needed to make change, and students had given us feedback over a number of years which has suggested that they really found it quite challenging moving to this more independent way of studying. They're forever trying to grapple with what's required and also what good looks like. So we'd given them the assessment criteria, etc., but they were still saying, but we don't understand. So it was clear that we really needed to make some changes. So in redesigning the module, we wanted to try and enhance students' independence and engagement. So we might want to call this self-regulation. And we wanted at the same time to engage students with the learning outcomes and the assessment criteria. So rather than them coming to this at the end when they're going to get assessed and thinking, what do I need to do a good job and get good marks, we wanted them to understand from the very outset of the module what the learning outcomes were. And in doing that, we hope that we would enhance the transparency of the assessment. And at the same time, what we wanted to do was to reduce the overall load on the students. So I mentioned just then about evaluative judgment. So what this is the ability to make judgments on your own work. And it's something that all of us do routinely, and we probably forget when we started doing that and what a process it was to get to the point of being able to do that effectively. And I think I hadn't probably quite realised that that is a skill that maybe some of our undergraduates are still developing and will go on to develop, and so we can't assume that they are good at doing that. Sometimes evaluative judgment is called self-regulation if you look in the assessment literature as well. And work by Bowd and Panadero suggested that if we can engage students in assessment, this can really help increase their self-regulation. So there's a lot of literature there. I won't go into any more detail just here, but there's not very much information in the literature about what we need to do in terms of how much practice do we need to do, how often do we need to do it, when should we do it, what should the interventions look like. So in a sense, this was kind of our first shot at having a go at trying to integrate some of these things into our third year course. So Zimmerman suggested there were 4 levels to self-regulation. So the first level is understanding requirements. So that's just what is it that makes this a good report, or this makes this a good research project. The next level is to then internalise the standards. So that's about practicing and kind of understanding them at a slightly more deep level. The third level to Zimmerman's self-regulation is self-control. So that's being able to actually take those standards and to then understand how you can use those to be successful. And level 4, which is the highest level, is about then being able to take that learning on into new challenges. So we wanted to try and do this with our third year course. So we thought about this and we thought, well, what does level 1 mean? So it means it's about observing. So if we said to students, right, we're going to ask you to co-design assessment rubrics with us, that means that you've got to be able to look at what makes this a good report and say this would be like co-designing the criteria, if you like. The next level then would be co-assessment. So let's take some work and let's, together with other students, make an assessment of how good we think that is against the rubrics that we've already designed. The third level is about then being able to self-assess, so being able to look at your own work and saying, is this good? Where do I need to improve, etc. And then thinking about action planning. And then the highest level in Zimmerman's framework is to then be able to integrate that learning into your future work. So I'm sure this probably to all of us seems like a really straightforward routine thing that we do probably without thinking most of the time, but I think for our undergraduates this is still something that they're learning to be proficient at. So just looking at our timetable that we had for the third year lab, and I'm sure everybody appreciate that a lot of the time the challenges that we have is trying to break out the frameworks that we have. So we either have strict timetables, we have historical reasons why we have to teach in a certain way because it links to something else, and maybe certain colleagues have kind of own part of this and we can't change it, and all of these restrictions that I'm sure everybody will smile to themselves and say, yes, we have that. So we do as well. So what we had was previously we had 3 projects, and the reason for this is that we have to have inorganic, organic and physical projects, and each of those 3 projects ran in the same way over a 5-week period. So it was a week of preparation, 3 weeks of practical work, a week of writing up, and then start the next project, and then start the next project. So trying to get any feedback in between these was quite difficult, and the students were constantly on to the next one, not bothered anymore about the last one. So what we wanted to do was to reduce that load and try and make overall the learning experience more valuable. So we wanted to go to just 2 projects, so get away from this inorganic, organic, physical rotation, and just have 2 projects and develop the learning outcomes so they were associated with the skills for doing these research projects, as opposed to relating to organic chemistry or inorganic chemistry, etc. So by doing this and reducing the number of projects to 2, that then brought us some more time in which we could do better preparation for starting the project work. So rather than just jumping straight into it because we've got to get into it to get the 3 projects finished, we could now take stock, and we then developed a timetable where we had 1 project in each semester, and that then gave us time at the beginning of the year to have some workshops and to put some workshops into weeks 2 and 3 of teaching. So I'm not going to talk about all of these today. So literature searching, team working. What I want to talk to you about is designing assessment criteria and peer review and assessment of reports. So the designing assessment criteria workshop was about trying to get students to understand what the module was about. So I really believed that the students had enough knowledge to understand what the module was about. So I said to the students, third year is going to be like this. It's going to be a project. This is how it's going to work. Now I want you to think about what skills you've already got that are going to be useful for this project. So I asked them, reflect on the skills you've already acquired that are going to be applicable to this project work in the third year. Then have a think about what skills you think you need to still develop to carry out the mini projects. It was amazing. The students pretty much nailed all of these. So I used Padlet for these exercises, which I can talk about in more detail after the talk if anybody's interested. I then said to the students, okay, so you've worked out what skills you've got, you've worked out what skills you need to develop. Now tell me what you think the learning outcomes should be. And again, they pretty much nailed these. Really, really impressed with this. So it's not that we design it and only we understand. The students actually, given the time, can do a pretty good job of doing it themselves as well. I then asked them, well, how can we assess these? Because ultimately we have to assess them because we have to return a mark for you. I then wanted to get the students to start looking at reports. So this was the next workshop, was looking at what makes a good report. So rather than them at the end of the year saying, well, should I include this? Should I include that? How should I write it? I wanted them to look at some reports at the beginning of the year and think about what made some of these reports good and what they thought needed improving in some of these reports. I then asked them, well, what do you think the assessment criteria should be? I.e., what makes this good? And then I asked them to start co-assessing reports using those criteria with their peers in a workshop. So the idea of this is by the time you start your project work, you're really clear about what this module is about, hopefully what you're going to be learning, how we're going to assess you, and what good looks like. So this is kind of levels 1 and 2. We then wanted to think about introducing levels 3 and 4, so self-assessment and action planning. So later on, after the first project, during the write-up period, we asked them to self-evaluate themselves. So we gave them the marking criteria that we were going to mark them against, which they'd already seen in the earlier workshops, and we said, right, self-evaluate yourselves against these criteria. They then got feedback on their reports at the beginning of semester 2, or after the project, or at the end of the year, and they then we then had a workshop, so we had a structured review of feedback. I got them to go through, highlight positive and negative areas from their project, reflect on the differences between their own self-evaluation and the staff assessment, and then after they'd done all of that, to then formulate questions for the assessor. They then had timetable tutorials to discuss those questions, and then we had a further workshop where we said, right, now you're going to write development plans. So have a look at these questions that you had here, take on board the feedback, the further feedback you got, and then write an action plan. And they had to submit that. So the idea was, this is your contract to yourself about what you need to focus on in your second project. Or when we did the feedback at the end of the year, this was focused on either going into 4th year or going into the world of work if they were 3rd year graduates. So what we did in terms of evaluation was, we were, as I said before, the theoretical models are quite established, but there's limited evidence in the literature for how to embed self-regulation into our modules. So what we wanted to do really, and what I'm going to talk to you about just now, is to understand students' self-perceived competence and motivation. So before the interventions, how did they feel? And after the interventions, how did they feel? So these are the workshops that we'd introduced for them. So the questions that we asked them was about their nervousness. So how nervous do you feel about the project before and after? How difficult, so in terms of completing the project, it seems like a difficult task. How did they feel about that before, and how did they feel about that after the workshop, so before they started the projects? How did they understand what was required of the projects? How confident they were about self-assessing themselves and being able to identify actions. So some of these we did before and after the workshops at the beginning of the year, and some of the questions were asked at the end of the year after the feedback and reflection workshops. I won't go into all of the data here, but the headlines were that students' understanding of criteria went up, their confidence to self-assess went up, their satisfaction went up, and they were less nervous about the project. So we have some really, really positive feedback on this, and I am going to publish this, so there'll be more out there soon for you to look into. But obviously in the meantime, if anyone wants to discuss any of this in more detail, you're very welcome to get in touch with me, but obviously a bit limited today with time. So this was really, really positive. So we've now ran this module twice, although this year we kind of got cut short a little bit. But again, it's been really positive again this year. So what we really was really pleased about was that students were had better awareness of what was required of them. And here I'm talking about assessment rubrics. Their self-perceived abilities also improved, and that was really fantastic to hear, because the feedback we'd had before had been very much that they get to the end to come to do the assessed part, or what they saw as the assessed part, and they didn't really understand at that point. And we felt there was a lot of lost learning opportunity if the students were going into the projects without a thorough understanding. So we're going to do some more evaluation on the self-assessment part and the feedback reflections. This is all kind of work in progress at the moment. And we've got ideas of how we might then kind of modify this in future years. So in terms of acknowledgements, obviously the students and colleagues, so people have just really engaged with this fantastically, and we couldn't have done what we did without the feedback we've got from the students. We've got thousands and thousands of responses across 2 years and across all of the different workshops that we've done. And as I say, we are currently still analysing data. Carmen Thomas and Jonathan Halls at the University of Nottingham in the teaching excellent service, they've been doing the data analysis. I wanted to thank Michael and Dino for the invitation today to talk. It's quite funny actually thinking about this, because when Michael first asked me about this back in, we were in Italy at Euro Variety last July, and it seems quite funny now that we're here, and actually this is the only conference probably a lot of us will go to this year because we can't physically get together. So thank you very much for the invitation. Thanks to everybody for listening, and very happy to take any questions now or at a later date afterwards if people want to contact me by email. Thank you.